Tonight on Primetime Politics, drawing a line.
We have to take care of ourselves because we can't rely on one foreign partner.
The Prime Minister makes his strongest remarks on the state of Canada-U.S. relations, describing it as a current source of weakness. What does his speech say about the state of trade talks and how rough will the road ahead be? We'll examine what's behind the speech with two political strategists. Also, former Canadian ambassador to the UN Bob Rae. We'll speak to him about the foreign policy implications of the Prime Minister's speech and the wisdom of being so blunt ahead of the CUSMA review. Plus,
I have the honor to introduce a bill, an act respecting the recognition of wartime services.
Recognizing the service of Canadians who fought in the first Gulf War and Afghanistan. This is Primetime Politics. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Serapio. Well, the Conservatives came out swinging this afternoon, hitting back against a video from the Prime Minister that was posted Sunday morning. With that, take a listen to what we heard from the Conservative leader in his own video posted this afternoon.
The rhetoric simply does not match the results. Illusions are not reality. Lofty summit speeches, meaningless MOUs, and symbolic signing ceremonies do not pay your mortgage, gas your tank, or fill your grocery cart here at home. We do not need more costly illusions for Mr. Carney. We need real-world results at your grocery store, your gas pump, and in your bank account. We must be affordable at home, safe at home, and strong at home so that we can have unbreakable leverage abroad.
And here is the original video and message that Pierre Poilievre is reacting to, posted by the Prime Minister Sunday morning. It's an update on efforts to diversify Canada's economy. It is also perhaps the clearest Mark Carney has ever been to a domestic audience about how U.S. actions are hurting Canada's economy.
Many of our former strengths, based on our close ties to America, have become our weaknesses that we must correct. Workers in our industries most affected by U.S. tariffs, in autos, in steel, in lumber, are under threat. Businesses are holding back investments, restrained by the pall of uncertainty that's hanging over all of us. The U.S. has changed, and we must respond.
Well, with their thoughts on the Prime Minister's video and the Conservative leader's response, we're now joined by Liberal strategist Stevie O'Brien, principal and founding partner at Barrack Hill Public Affairs, and Conservative strategist Jordan Paquet, vice president at Blue Sky Strategy Group. Hello to both of you.
Hello.
So listen, let's break this up and begin with the Prime Minister's video, because that was the first one out. And I have to say, when I saw it, I found myself, debating in my head, why is he doing this right now? Is this essentially an admission that trade talks are going horribly with the United States? Why do you think he's posting this video, Stevie?
I think there's a few reasons. One, there isn't a natural avenue for the Prime Minister to speak to the Canadian public. The speech from the throne is delivered by the Governor General. The upcoming spring economic statement will be delivered by the Finance Minister. And scrums and question period isn't really a way to deliver or speak to the Canadian public. And I think what we've seen, and he's even been criticized for not speaking enough about what's going on, not explaining enough. What I saw there was a man who used to be a governor of the Bank of Canada, used to coming out with economic updates, somebody who's a business leader, and that it kind of gave me the vibe of a CEO speaking to the company when tough times are coming.
Tough times are coming. I'll leave it at that thought. But Jordan, I'll bring you in. Why do you think he's doing this right now?
Sure, and I'm going to respectfully disagree. I think one of the best spots to go and speak directly to Canadians is inside of Parliament. I mean, the Prime Minister can go in and deliver an update at any point that he wants into it and allow the oppositions to respond, but he seems to like being out elsewhere, and that's totally fine. The Prime Minister has any opportunity to address Canadians, and this is what he chose to. I do think it certainly raises some questions about how the negotiations are going. He gave this speech in Davos a couple months ago. He gave very similar messages in the campaign last year about he was going to be the one to get get this done. But here we are over a year into his mandate, and there's still no movement on it. In fact, it seems like, from at least the U.S.'s standpoint, that things aren't going great in the negotiations. So the U.S., despite absolutely all the troubles with the Trump administration and how completely unfair that they've been to us over these negotiations, it's still up to the Prime Minister to get down there and get a deal, and that's what he promised to do in the election.
Which essentially is the message that we've now heard from the Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, responding late this afternoon to the video that was put out by the Liberals Sunday morning. What do you make of that argument? Because essentially what he says, in broad stroke, is that the speech is nothing new, and it's basically meant to hide the lack of accomplishment of this first year.
I wouldn't say that there's been a lack of accomplishment. From my perspective, Carney has done a lot to set up Canada for success, has made major announcements vis-a-vis additional spending. So you can't sort of criticize him that hasn't done anything, as the leader of the opposition did, and then also criticize him for all the money that he's spending doing projects that you are also objecting to. So it's a bit of it's politics.
Because both messages were in that speech.
Both messages were in that speech. But I think Carney's, he's got a plan, and he's going to speak to the public on the CUSMA thing, on USMCA. I think he's setting people up because a deal is not possible. Or a deal is going to be, how do you make a deal with Donald Trump and then believe that he's going to uphold that end of the deal? Even if we went down and negotiated the best deal ever, the next day we could find out on Twitter or X that it's been torn up. And so I think Carney's doing the right thing, saying we're doubling down on diversifying our trade, finding new partners, but he's being honest with the public that it's going to be a bit of a rocky go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll pick up on that point, though, and Jordan, I'll get you in, because what we heard from Pierre Poilievre, not really all that different than the speech he gave last week at the Canadian Club in Toronto. And he talks about policies that the Conservatives have been essentially raising the last month, things like getting the traditional auto pact up and running again to preserve the auto industry in this country, securing a tariff-free free trade deal with the United States, except that when I've spoken to U.S. officials, they are very clear. Any deal, as far as they are concerned with the Trump White House, will include a tariff. And I was in the Oval Office when Donald Trump said it. He does not care to have Canadian-made cars as part of these deals. He says the United States has their own cars. So is there an argument to be made that the Prime Minister is being more direct with Canadians about the challenges ahead of them, rather than trying to sell off a possibility that the Americans say that they're not open to?
No, I mean, look, you raised some interesting points, but at the end of the day, it's up to the Prime Minister to negotiate this deal. Canada has some leverage in this. Of course, the U.S. is the economic superpower of the world. So yeah, they have a lot more. We have a lot more to lose than they do in this, but we still have certain things that we can offer up. I mean, we have our natural resources. We could make North America an energy superpower, as I think all parties have talked about doing. So we have avenues that we can help to leverage, and this is all part of the negotiation on this. And Donald Trump's not going to be president forever. He may even have his wings clipped in the midterm elections and lose some of his power. So who knows when it comes to that side. But I will say it seems to be that it's been Pierre Poilievre doing some of the heavy lifting here, going down and going on shows and meeting with the governors that the president is close to and shows that the president listens to. And I think it would be interesting for the Prime Minister to actually go down and take up some of this mantle himself and start doing it. Great that some of the ministers are going down, but I think Trump would probably like to see a one-on-one negotiation here as well at some point.
Stevie?
When you say heavy lifting, you meant kettlebells, right?
Sure, absolutely, fair enough.
But no, I mean, I think Carney's got a very difficult line to walk. He never mentioned Trump by name in his statement. He didn't in the Davos speech as well. He needs to demonstrate strength without sort of poking the bear or antagonizing and making the situation worse. I think when the Canadian Prime Minister goes down to Washington in this particularly tense time, it will have to be for very deliberate reasons with defined outcomes. It's easier when you're opposition to go around and do podcasts and do things like that. I think it would be much more difficult for the Prime Minister to take on that risk. I'm interested to see how the negotiations go. We're started in many industries and many Canadians are nervous about them. Personally, I don't think that there's much. I don't see how you negotiate with the U.S. when they are not holding up their word. They're not showing themselves to be a trustworthy partner. How do you make a deal with somebody who you no longer trust?
Listen, I'm going to pick up on a point that Stevie made about tough times ahead. And the Prime Minister says he will be giving more updates in future. We don't know the frequency of that. We don't know the when of that. However, it does raise the possibility that the Canadian economy and therefore the Canadian people will be facing some tough times ahead. What do you read into that, Jordan?
Yeah, and I hope not, but it's very clear that the headwinds are coming in many different areas. You have either national unity issues as well. You have the situation in Iran right now that seems to get more out of control and chaotic. We have no idea what's going to happen there. So we have no idea what's going to happen with global oil prices. All we can do is look at what we can affect here at home. And unfortunately, after the last 10 years of the Liberal government and Justin Trudeau, we haven't been in a state where we can get some of our resources to market and actually can control our own or produce it more domestically for domestic consumption. So I think there's a lot of things that the government can do and do it quite quickly to break down some of those barriers within inside Canada that we can use to help strengthen our economy here. I agree, we can't just be reliant on one person for the rest of history and have all our eggs in one basket. That's why the Harper government went out and signed so many trade deals with countries around the world. But that's just something that the government's going to have to get to doing quite quickly instead of just talking about it.
Stevie, what do you say about the tough headwinds ahead?
Well, I think that there are tough headwinds ahead. I think that Carney's probably quite happy that he has a majority government now, so that it could create some stability as he tries to steer this ship and roll out his vision. I think his vision includes what was just mentioned, which big projects, getting natural resources, critical minerals out of the ground and build pipelines, which actually are very different from what the last Liberal government was focused on. But he's announced that he's having an investment summit to attract $1 trillion of foreign direct investment into these areas in the fall, supporting massive spend in defense industrial base and other major projects. It takes a long time to build a pipeline, so I'm not surprised that when you're out, there is nothing concrete, but I think that's coming. I've never seen the government or the public service be working quite this fast since COVID.
Okay, well, we continue to watch. Stevie, Jordan, thank you very much. Well, the economic and political aspects aside, the Prime Minister's Sunday video also doubles down on a point he made in Davos and in Montreal when the Liberals met the week before, that Canada can no longer rely on the United States alone, and any future reliance would be to Canada's detriment.
We have to take care of ourselves because we can't rely on one foreign partner. We can't control the disruption coming from our neighbors. We can't bet our future on the hope that it will suddenly stop, but we can control what happens here. We can build a stronger country that can withstand disruptions from abroad, that creates good jobs here at home, that's a leader in this new world with a vast network of reliable allies. That's the Canada Strong plan we're putting into action.
Well, joining us now to join the conversation is Bob Rae, Canada's former ambassador to the United Nations. Mr. Rae, always nice to see you. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure, Michael. Good to chat.
As always. I want to begin with the wisdom of this video message, because I do wonder how wise it is for the Prime Minister to be so vocal about, these doubts about the Americans with CUSMA up for review in July.
Well, I think he has to be candid with Canadians about how much the relationship has changed. And I think that's why he's doing this. I mean, to me, the whole decision to go to do this and to do it on YouTube and to do it the way he did it was very parallel to what Franklin Roosevelt did in the 30s. It's a way of talking to Canadians directly using the medium of social media. And engaging with them in that way, I think it's perfectly okay. And as for the wisdom of what he said, I think again a lot of headlines out of it sometimes I think really confuse the essential message, which is we have a challenge because of what's happening in this relationship, and also the challenge because of what's happening globally. But we also have some strengths, and I think the Prime Minister feels that he can blow his own horn, because if he doesn't do it, nobody else is going to do it for him. talk about the things that he's done, the things the government is doing. Others will take pot shots at that. But I think he's trying to open up one more way in which he will try to talk directly to the Canadian public, get people used to the idea that the Prime Minister will be talking to people on YouTube or any other social media from time to time. It's not unusual. It's what people do. It's how people communicate in this day and age. And I think he wanted to overcome the criticism that some people have made that, well, he's making all these announcements out of the country, but he has to make more here. So I think he's saying, fine, I'm happy to do them because my travel is necessary for my job, but I'm also committed to talking to everybody. Mm-hmm. So that's why he's doing what he's doing.
Which I understand for a domestic audience. But, ultimately, the Americans do listen to when the Prime Minister speaks. And just last week, we had Howard Lutnick, the U.S. Commerce Secretary. I'm sure you know this. He blasted Canada's trade strategy last week. He said, quote, they suck. The White House has already tried to walk that back. But doesn't the Prime Minister's video worsen an already bad situation? I take what you're saying about a domestic audience, but the Americans are listening.
I wouldn't talk about Mark Carney and Howard Lutnick in the same sentence if I were you. Their approach to life is completely different. Mr. Carney's tone was respectful, it was direct, it was informed, and it was intelligent. I'll let Howard Lutnick's comments stand for themselves, but there's a complete difference between what Mr. Carney was doing and what Mr. Lutnick did.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But beyond trade, there is now the question being asked about where the Canada-U.S. relationship stands and where it goes forward.
Well, I mean, I think we're having discussions. We're in the middle of a negotiation. We've also done a number of things with respect to our defense and our security policies. We're taking a number of steps. We're being very forward-leaning on areas where the Americans have been saying, you should do more, you need to do more. We've addressed the Arctic frontier questions. We're looking at security issues more broadly. The government is making huge investments in defense and other important infrastructure issues important for Canada and for the U.S. Those are all taking place, and frankly, we always like to say they speak for themselves, but nothing speaks for itself unless you speak for it as well. And I think the Prime Minister is quite right to be doing that. I don't find what he said disrespectful in the least. I think it's simply a description. Somebody puts a 50% tariff on some of our key industries. Somebody makes investment in our auto sector much more difficult because of the other policies that the government of the United States is following. I don't think it's improper or inappropriate for the Prime Minister to draw attention to these things, but in the context of a much longer and ongoing dialogue. And of course, every Canadian politician and public figure knows that whatever you say, whether it's on social media or in question period in the House of Commons or in any forum, is going to be listened to and watched by the President of the United States and his team, the American public, the American media, and also the global media, which is one of the reasons why I think recent global polling suggests that the Prime Minister's voice is one of the most respected voices around the world, which is not a bad thing, I would argue, when we look at what our global influence is and needs to be.
Yeah, global influence, and we certainly have seen reflections of that. We had the President of Finland here in Canada just last week, but I do wonder about where things stand in terms of a historical context, because it's already now 65 years since John F. Kennedy addressed Parliament. And at the time, you know this very well, this is what the U.S. President said of the Canada-U.S. relationship: geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, economics has made us partners, and necessity has made us allies. Is the spirit of that sentiment now dead, Mr. Rae?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's dead. But secondly, if it's damaged, it's not Mr. Carney who's damaged them. Let Mr. Trump use those words and then follow those words with deeds. We have quite the opposite. I mean, Howard Lutnick might want to take a look at that speech. Mark Carney has not initiated any division between Canada and the United States or made comments about a gap between us. He's simply describing something which is a direct result of changes in United States policy towards everyone, towards the world, toward economic allies, and including Canada. So we're not inventing something here. We're responding to something that has taken place, and he's doing it in a way that I think, as I said, I think it's respectful, and I think it's intelligent. I've quoted that line from President Kennedy many, many, many times, and I wish there were other subsequent reflections on that from the current American administration. I don't see them, but that's no reason for us to stop trying to negotiate an agreement, which is exactly what Canada is doing at the table and exactly what their trade negotiators are doing. And I think we would be doing everyone a disservice if we didn't say that because of some of the steps that the American government has taken, the lives of Canadians have been damaged. It's had a direct negative impact on the employment levels in the forest industry, in the aluminum industry, and in many other walks of life. Have been very much affected by the decisions that have been taken by the American government towards us. And I think it's important to understand that things can be repaired, things can be improved, but we all need to understand the consequences of what has been done so far and what has happened. And we have to respond in our own way, but certainly above all with a level of candor, which I think is entirely appropriate. And I would suggest, Michael, that if the Prime Minister didn't respond in candor and describe in candor what has gone on, that you would be the first one to say that the Prime Minister is not responding to these broad attacks on our economic health. And the Prime Minister has an obligation, a responsibility. His first obligation is to the people of Canada. He knows that perfectly well, and that's why he's responding the way he is.
Bob Rae, always appreciate the time. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
Now, we did get some reaction from Canadian premiers to the Prime Minister's video. Gathered in Ottawa today for a Canadian Chamber of Commerce event, the premiers were asked if they agree that the U.S. is now a source of weakness for Canada. Take a listen to what we heard from the premiers of New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Ontario, and the Northwest Territories.
In New Brunswick's case, it's 92% of our exports that go to the U.S. That's a vulnerability. And it makes you vulnerable not only to the conditions we're in today, but it makes you more of a price taker than a price setter. And that's why businesses look to diversify their customers, diversify the sectors that they're in, and that's why New Brunswick is doing the same thing. And luckily, we have what the world wants.
Weakness is not the way I would put it. Susan just said vulnerability might be a better word. I'm not sure how I'd describe it. I still see a long, prosperous future ahead of us with our relationship with the United States. The Trump era will end.
I tell our American friends, we don't see eye to eye with President Trump. Protectionism doesn't work anywhere in the world. And we have to move forward with the CUSMA or USMCA and get a deal done.
I would say it is a weakness. I mean, just look at the position that we're in right now. We are really under the gun with CUSMA, but I think that Canada has what it needs to become more self-sufficient. We're always going to have a strong relationship with the United States. Geography and relationships dictate that, but we don't need a dependent relationship where this threat of upending CUSMA, would throw our economy into a tailspin. We don't need that. We need to be more self-sufficient. We have the ability, and we should be doing it.
Well, last week, a new bill was tabled in the upper chamber, sponsored by Senator Hassan Yussuff. The bill would recognize the wartime service of Canadians who fought on military missions since the Korean War. Now, it's been dubbed the Wartime Service Recognition Act. The bill, if adopted, well, it would expand who would be recognized as a war veteran in this country, with the distinction currently reserved for a sailor, soldier, or airman who served in the First World War, the Second World War, or in Korea and only in those wars. With more, we're now joined by Senator Hassan Yussuff. Senator, nice to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
So, this exposes my ignorance, because I just assumed that if you were sent and fought for this country on a foreign soil in a war, that you'd be recognized as a veteran, you'd be recognized as a war veteran. Why is that not the case?
Well, I think your challenge of trying to understand this was the same one I had when it was explained to me by the Persian Gulf veterans. They've been lobbying, of course, for 8 years in their own effort, trying to get recognition. And as they were telling me their story, I was scratching my head and thinking, like, what am I missing here? But of course, many of the missions that we have dispatched the Canadian forces to support since the Korean War have not been called war. And many of our veterans, the Persian Gulf and others, will tell you they were in a war. If you ask the Afghans, veterans and still in the Canadian Armed Forces, were they in a war? They were being shot at. Many died in the Afghanistan war, but yet the definition that was used to dispatch them or to send them off to that mission, it wasn't called a war. And I think this is unfortunate, and our government has known this for quite some time. There have been recognition, I think, in the last election that this is something that needs to be looked at. And of course, it's been over a year and nothing has been. So when the veterans came to talk to me, I wanted to understand, first of all, what is the gap? And secondly, what can you do to help make this a reality?
What is the gap?
Well, the gap is the legislation is make it consistent to how you evaluate a mission and determine that these are war veterans, and more importantly, they should be recognized as such. This bill does not change what veterans will receive in terms of pensions and services and medical support. This bill is simply about symbolic recognition for the fact they were in a war and to be recognized for fighting in that war at the end of the day. But what it would do also, it would go back from the time of the Korean War and evaluate every mission that we have dispatched soldiers to, and evaluate each one individually and determine with some criteria whether or not those veterans should be recognized, and going into the future. So it doesn't stop simply with the Persian Gulf, it doesn't stop with the Afghanistan, but it's in for the future.
So it would put in a review process to consider whether or not someone was going forward,
yes,
whether someone is or is not a war veteran. Although, you talk about the Persian Gulf veterans, and I don't believe any Canadian was killed in the Persian Gulf War. No. That doesn't mean say they should not be recognized as a war veteran. That's just my recollection. But certainly when it comes to the war in Afghanistan, we had over 160 Canadian soldiers killed in that war, and we know for a fact that people came back either injured physically or mentally. So when they talk to you about not being recognized as a wartime veteran, what do they say to you about what that does to them, to know that they don't have that distinction to their service?
Well, they feel that the country is not honoring them for what they sacrifice on behalf of the nation for. Secondly, they feel that they were cheated, because they know they were in a war. They know that their sacrifice was on behalf of Canada, and they don't understand why this is the case. It's about dignity, it's about fairness, about transparency, and it's also about treating those right now as we're recruiting young Canadians to join the military. It sends a clear message. We value their service, but equally we value their sacrifices at the same time, because when you join the military, you commit to one thing. You never know whether you're going to go off to fight, and more importantly, whether you might be injured or die in that effort. They don't question the motivation of what they're doing. They question, of course, these veterans are now questioning, why is it taking so long? And of course, why do they have to lobby Parliament to do something? Now, the veterans in the House of Commons, they already looked at this issue. The Veterans Affairs Committee, and recommended that it should happen. Now, in the last election, because again, the efforts of the veterans, they did get the Liberal Party to recognize. They wanted to look and do something about this, and the Conservative equally has given them a letter saying they wanted to do something and recognize it. I think this bill provides an opportunity for the government to do that, and more importantly, to get on with it, because the longer we wait, somebody will die, and of course, I think that's unfair to their families and to them for their sacrifice to the country.
Well, as we say, you put forward the bill. It's now been tabled. We will watch to see where it goes. Senator, thank you for the time.
Thank you for having me.
And that is Primetime Politics for this Monday. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Primetime Politics is back tomorrow evening. Until then, take care.